Please be sure to go visit the original Reddit post as they provide the story and give them a thumbs up. Hello everyone! Since you're here, that either means you just got this video recommended to you, or you decided to check out more of my content. If this is your first video on this channel, hi! I'm Sweeps, the gaming robot, here to archive tales of the D&D table, here to make things a little more entertaining and maybe a little more annoying. Today's story talks about the dreaded Nice Guy. For those who aren't in the know, which I doubt considering how popular D&D videos are becoming on YouTube, a nice guy is essentially a person who is nice but has an ulterior motive for their necessities. Mostly with the intention of gaining, well, I do want to be seen on YouTube, so use your imagination. Today's story is titled, Nice Guy Cleric simps over my wife and tells me I shouldn't let her be scared and anxious instead of happy and confident. Oh boy, a simp as well? Great! Old story, but one I've been thinking about a lot recently. Okay, so this was a one-shot at a convention a friend of mine was running as his first foray into DMing. It looked like a module, but I don't know the name. Basically, a load of goblins had been stealing from travelers and were taking it back to the cave network, where it turned out they were giving it to a dragon for its hoard. The players in this drama are me, the male human fighter, my wife, male dwarf barbarian, the DM, my sister-in-law, female half-elf rogue, a random girl that wanted to go, the same female half-elf rogue, and the problem, male elf cleric. Game has 4 set characters. Normally I would play the cleric or the barbarian, but as I was the most experienced and had been GMing for a long time, I said I would just take what was left to fill out the party and help the new GM or new players if there was any problems, or they needed advice. By rule of ladies first, and my sister-in-law and the other girl, whose name I don't remember, not knowing what to do meant my wife picks first, and she decided to play the dwarf barbarian to try something different to rogue or bard. My sister-in-law and the girl had been talking and asked if they could both play the half-elf rogue so they could confer on what to do as they hadn't played before. The DM says that's okay and my wife offers to help them as rogue was her main class. Then Nice Guy goes next, as I had been okay with and had been talking with him earlier that I main cleric and it's fairly back of party role and responsible role. He picks elf cleric. Fair enough, that leaves me with the human fighter. Now before I get into the session, I should mention there have been other red flags with Nice Guy, so I will list a few of the big ones. Repeatedly talks over any woman he was nearby while proclaiming how much of a feminist he was, telling us that marriage and monogamy was an outdated and sexist concept of the monogamous patriarchy, my wife was my fiancé at the time, spent almost 10 minutes arguing why he should have won a round of Cards Against Humanity because he was smarter, and wouldn't accept that my sister-in-law's was funnier as a reason. Rejected alcoholic drinks that were brought to the table we were at as I was a guest at the event because alcohol weakens the mind. Explaining to my Irish friend how stupid the troubles in Ireland were when my friend's family were on both sides and lost family during the troubles. Telling my wife how much she reminds me of a character from My Little Pony. It's always the bronies, yay! Ugh.
Yay!
Who appears to have severe social anxiety. My wife has severe clinical anxiety and has been in therapy for years to get better, so being compared to this character did not help. And we found out he has a huge crush on that character and even has of that character on his phone. He told me my wife was good at how she was and I should stop trying to turn her into something she isn't. Note, the something she isn't is confident, likes being around people and handles her anxiety. The how she was quiet, scared, meek, and had panic attacks around the clock just from being near her friends and family, never mind a convention of almost 3,000 people. There are a lot more, and this guy had been in our group for years, and we couldn't just get rid of him because most of us wouldn't tell him to sod off because they were shy, and the 3 of us didn't because he had ton of issues, and other members, including my wife, the GM of this game, and many others would always make excuses that he didn't understand, or he's just a little awkward, or he's harmless. Looking back, I now realize that's how so many people like him get away with some really toxic behavior, and I don't put up with this kind of behavior anymore, even if I wind up looking at the bad guy. Okay! So I'm going a little off script on this one, because after reading this out loud and thinking about it for a few moments, this is a one-shot at convention, and if you had all these red flags, I don't think it would have been a good idea to have him join up on this. In any case, this is unfortunately a common occurrence in D&D games. As OP says, this is how people like this do show up in games. With this sort of stuff, you need to put your foot down immediately. Even if others make excuses, that doesn't excuse this kind of behavior, especially in a public space as a convention. If you have a player like this in the group, you need to keep it up and talk to the others in the group to say this kind of behavior should not be tolerated. Especially the whole BS with the Fluttershy stuff. I used to be a brony myself. I'm recovering, dang it! It can be hard, but you need to voice your concerns, and you need to do it in a reasonable manner, as these kinds of people will be looking for any sort of negativity that you display into ammunition to paint you as the bad guy and them as the victim. It's toxic behavior. Back to the campaign. As soon as the game starts, Nice Guy, who is playing the Cleric, decides to take every opportunity to get in the way of my wife, who is playing a Dwarf Barbarian wielding a +1 Great Axe, +3 against Goblins. He has a sling and a scimitar and decides that, as a man of God, he must be on the front line protecting Milady. Note that the Dwarf Barbarian my wife is playing is a male. I tried to gently explain to him that this was a bad idea. He was purely a healing and buffing cleric with no damaging spells, studded leather armor, that he wasn't working with the party. He continually dragged out every fight longer than it should have by getting in the way, trying to take hits for my wife's character, and occasionally the two girls' rogue, though not as often. He ignored everything, even when I suggested fighting from the backline with the rogue, who, by the way, were playing amazingly between the two of them. They came up with really creative solutions, pinged enemies from the backline, and got the hang of backstabbing really quickly, as me and my wife were the front line and we needed range support. He continued to physically get in the way to defend the barbarian dwarf and try to attack high-level enemies. The table is getting angrier, the DM is losing control and getting disheartened, and my wife is furious at him to the point where this normally very shy and quiet woman starts almost screaming at him to get to the back, or she'll chop his head off and will go on without him. No one but him and me argued with the idea, but it continued until he became so much of a problem and we only had the table for about 30 minutes more and we weren't even halfway through the dungeon.
Rage, fury, irritation, humiliation.
I finally passed a note to the DM. I tie the cleric up and carry him. He made me make a roll for both and there it was.
Put me down or you will suffer the consequences!
I had to abandon my bow and hand some of my potions out, but that was fine. The rogue girls were ecstatic to get a bow rather than throwing knives. We carry on, occasionally swapping between my fighter and my wife's barbarian. Looking back, he tried to make escape checks a lot less often when my wife's character was carrying him, which has just skeeved us both at the thought. We meet the boss of the dungeon, a goblin chief riding a spider. Perfect! I dump the cleric and tell him to stay there out of trouble.
I'm no one's messenger boy, alright? I'm a delivery boy.
The fight begins and that guy is constantly trying to escape until he does. He charges past the rogue on 2 HP, runs past me dealing with 3 goblins and on half HP, puts himself directly between my wife's barbarian, who was at full HP, and the goblin chief she had been preparing a big attack for. An attack that would deal 3d8 plus 10 damage to this goblin chief. He took the damage from the goblin chief, 1d6 with d6 poison damage, and it nearly floored him. This attack would have barely scratched my wife's barbarian because, of course, she's a barbarian and a dwarf, and they have advantage against goblins and poison. After I finally lose my temper with him, and my wife having to move her character model and change the attack a further 2 rounds, the fight was done, and we won, and I ordered him to heal the rogue while my wife and I take health potions. He still tries to heal my wife's barbarian, who had taken a total of 2 points of damage, which was completely his fault for getting in the way and dragging out the fight and forcing her to suffer an attack of opportunity, but she has her dwarf physically slap him and in character scream at him, and he does as she says. Even me and the DM were done with this guy's shit at this point, and we had 10 minutes left. We cleared over half the dungeon in 20 minutes when he was tied up, when before that it had taken us almost an hour and a half to get to the halfway point because of him slowing us down. This is when the DM shows us what was meant to be the epic dungeon fight at the end of the dungeon. The dragon flies away to speed things up, which pisses us all off. This results in one of my first times in character turns, PvP, and the rogue, using a bag of goblin heads they had gotten off my wife during one of our trades of carrying the cleric, she had been collecting the heads in a burlap sack for, in my wife's words, serial killer reasons. Okay then, They join in as we lay into the cleric until he is dead and bleeding. While the barbarian stole all the loot, we would take his money and then claim that the goblins killed the cleric while we curse his name to oblivion.
Fuck you!
Nice Guy complained to anyone that would listen, but at that point I took everyone away and ran a game of Maid RPG to calm down and refused to let him join in. We're almost done with the story, but I do need to point something out. This isn't meant to be a defense of Nice Guy, but I do have to raise an eyebrow. I'm not against PvP inherently, but this isn't really a good idea when dealing with people, especially if you do it in a more coherent group of people and not just at a convention. This has to do with giving the problem player ammunition again. People like this will do whatever they can in order to get an edge over you in psychological warfare. They'll use any sort of bad behavior in order to justify a victim complex. After all, that's what these people do. If it was me, I would have just dumped him in there and not included the PvP in this. You don't want to give these people an inch because they'll easily take a mile. Trust me, I've experienced this myself in my own games and including a few one-shots. I felt bad and would later apologize to the DM for how things went down, but he told me he was happy because that guy apparently had done the same thing the day before and learned nothing and would proceed to get in the way of combat to save the lovely lady he was crushing on, even if she was playing a dwarf barbarian or dragonborn paladin, until he was finally told he was banned from joining any of the one-shots being run at the convention due to dragging the games out and making sessions late, not finished due to time constraints. I would later lose contact with Nice Guy, and I don't regret it one bit after he sent a plush of the same MLP character he fetishized, and told my wife she was like, to my wife under the guise of a birthday present. Her birthday is in August and he sent it in June. Too long didn't read. Nice Guy Simp plays Cleric and tries to protect my wife while ruining the campaign, and then gets butthurt after we kill him in-game and refuse to let him simp over a game of Maids RPG. It's always the bronies. Again, aside from the PvP, this is a tale of the dreaded Nice Guy. This kind of behavior should be called out, and while excuses can be made, it should be discussed and dealt with immediately. The best way to go about this is to talk to other people of the group in private to see where they stand and to voice your concerns to them. If you can get enough people who agree with you, you can show others in your group that this is an issue that can't be ignored. Power in numbers. For this specific scenario, I believe that you should just kick the player out if they keep on doing this, especially if you have limited time. Players like this should not be allowed to do so, especially if they did it on the day before. Then again, hindsight is 20/20, and I'm just a robot on the internet who's giving his advice and reading Reddit posts just for the fun of it. In any case, I hope you guys enjoyed this tale. I am Sweeps, and please try to have a good day.
Bye bye.